Thank you for having me here today. So my presentation is some of the about what we have been co-creating in the city of Gurgaon. I came across a term last month called Grey Rhino. It's a term introduced by a policy analyst, much like Black Swan event, but it basically talks about a highly probable, high impact yet neglected threat. The risk is evident and the event is foreseeable. Sounds very much like climate change. Across the world, landscape architects contribute to the health, safety and welfare of people and environments. In India, not so much in the public domain, particularly as we have less control over design or the landscape outcomes. Working on a number of public projects, we struggle to contribute enough on projects we thought were critical, but lost control once the design left our desks. As a result, site discoveries, cohesive integration, design interpretation weren't addressed, and we would have, making the lack of our inclusion frustrating. Yet landscape architects have the potential to engage land, water, air and natural resources, as we all know, and also to include people's cultures, education, skilling and even create employment opportunities. Therefore, our work over the past 5-6 years has consciously focused on rethinking public spaces, restoring nature in cities, reinventing waste, adapting traditional ideas, building resilience and creating simple, intuitive, viable and replicable practices. Fortunately for us, we were engaged by a citizens group and subsequently others, where we were able to start small but transform our role and scope of work as we decided to embrace the opportunity, the little opportunity, and make it a lot more, and with a lot more learnings, experimentation, innovation, and possibilities. Just to give you a little brief about how we've been following it, we've typically been hired by an NGO. The first one that we were hired was I Am Gurgaon, which has been doing a lot of work in the city of Gurgaon over the last 15 years. They developed the Aravali Biodiversity Park, and they had a project that their mandate has been to plant native trees and work on the ecology. So that was the first project that we took on. We were hired to design, supervise, and over time it became whatever we wanted it to be. The projects were typically for the government. The land was owned by the government. Just a little bit about Gurgaon. Gurgaon is called the Millennium City, but up just till 2011, its population had tripled in just 10 years. Subsequently, it's been, I think we hear more about it in terms of Gurujam, the city gets flooded, waste is a humongous problem, it's polluted, it's flooded, the government asks you to work from home at the drop of a hat if it rains. The city of Gurgaon, just to locate, is south of Delhi. The Aravali Hills to the southeast have all the watershed flowing from the Aravali Hills to what was the Ghata Lake, which was 340 hectares, which is now 1 acre. The entire storm drain went through Badshapur, all the way up to Najafgarh and then following on to Yamuna. It's a fairly flat city other than the Aravali Hills. The section that is highlighted, I mean it's actually half of that. Because of the flooding over many years, most of the natural waterways, the channels have been impacted, have been encroached. This is the start of where our site was. It was actually the Badshapur Jheel, which was a very significant water body. It no longer exists. This is in 2018. There's a highway, and now it even have underpasses and the Delhi-Mumbai expressway across on the top. Because of all of this, the entire site that we have, which was the Badshapur Nehar, was converted into the Badshapur drain. It's almost a 20-25 kilometer drain, and the site we found ourselves on when we came into it was basically a dump site. It was where all waste from all the surrounding developments was dumped. The photos to the below are adjacent to it, which is because the drain was also at a height. There was no every time it rained, the neighboring developments flooded and the boats came out. So this is a situation in a typical section that we found ourselves with, where there's a storm sewer drain running all the way through the site. And this varied from almost 8 meters to 15 or 20 meters, almost covering the entire length. It was a corridor site that we had. And we looked at it as landscape architects do, starting with a concept that we felt was key to everything that we wanted to address, which was the story of Gurgaon, its people and its places, the circle of waste, because that's what we found ourselves, and the journey of water, which is where we intended to look at the site. This site that we took on eventually started with a pilot project of 200 meters, but we developed an area, a length of 5.5 kilometers. It was divided into 8 different stretches. Each of the stretches had a very different context around it. There were gated communities, schools, colleges, 4 urban villages, migrant labor encampments, industry, and it connected to very significant arterial roads, the National Highway 8 to the north, and to the south, the Southern Peripheral Highway, which is where most of the new developments are. That was where we started. We started small with the intention to build only on the drain, develop cycling and walking, cycling, jogging tracks. The jogging was off track, and maximize the area for plantation. That was the goal of our client, but our goal was also to capture, absorb and retain all the rainwater on the site. Each of the spaces, just because of the context, also developed for us as a thematic space, a thematic stretch. So we started to even look in terms of how we interpret, how we talk about the site in terms of connections with nature. We call them Jheelway, Vanway, Jalway, Vayuway, other things. We developed spaces with names and characters that were unique to each space. We reused waste to a large extent because to start with we had so much of it, but also we found that it was very easy and for us to just drive around Gurgaon and find waste, and that became something we started with. Our clients intended us to use it in the base work because they had done that in previous projects. We decided we'd put it in everything we could possibly do. So we had waste in our walls. We had waste stone in our pathways. We found concrete beams along the road, finished them up, and those became seats. We found that when we were developing the spaces, people came out to use them in different ways. So this is the 4th corridor that we had. We developed a small little space, and we found we had a larger play area and a smaller play area, and the entire village communities would come, and almost, because it was a smaller space, all the toddlers would come and use that, and the older children would use in a different space. We managed, because it was a drain that we were developing on, there were manholes that we had to deal with, most of which were constructed very poorly. So we had to work around them, and those became areas in the center that we call our medians. We developed 58 different unique medians, 7 play areas all across the site. Waste was a huge part of everything we did. We used everything we found, most of it construction debris, a lot of waste even in the infill and creating. We started initially just removing all the waste, and then we found we were creating almost a landfill. And eventually all of that started to get used, because as we went further down the drain, we found the extent of waste was so enormous that if we didn't address it, and the water, because that was where also there was a lot of the sewage treatment plant, so that waste also started to add up. Just to give you an idea of how we use the waste, every stretch had a different approach in the smallest areas of design that we did, just because that's the waste we found at that point. Also sometimes, a lot of the time, the money that was available at the time. But 94% of the waste material that we, 94% of all the material we used for construction was waste, out of which most of it was from site, from around, mixed waste, earthwork, concrete debris. The construction debris we used in many different ways, from gabion walls to actual walls to fill to I think larger seating depending on the size. The area is a very densely populated area. So initially initially there was a lot of concern about how much seating we were providing, but eventually it's always falling short even right now. It's just some of the, we also created a large, we started with smaller interpretation panels because so much of what we did was important to address in terms of what can be done. There was one stretch we actually found stone walls on the side, so stone became a part of what we did, but it wasn't always, there was barely anything we used as a new material. As part of this, another campaign that our client was running and had started was a recycle station. We developed a module of how to develop that, again using waste, where they segregate 4 types of plastic, e-waste, paper, metal and glass, and now this is becoming a prototype that is hopefully getting replicated around Gurgaon and possibly Haryana as well. So I was talking about water earlier. So this is what we found ourselves in. Each stretch was different. Some were encroached, some were flooded, some were had parking use. What we ended up developing, and this varied depending on the stretch, is we created that movement on the drain, so that our construction was limited to areas that were already hard, and all the rest of it became areas of connected swales, larger water channels, water bodies, and each stretch had different thematic spaces. We had some areas that we developed ponds, some areas we used concrete waste pipes for rainwater recharge. We very consciously didn't look at rainwater harvesting at all, because this is a public site. It is going to go back to the government after a few years, and the capacity to maintain is very limited. So everything we wanted to do was very simple and intuitive, and that's something that they can both do and also manage. And also because there are 8 different stretches and there are two sides of a drain, each stretch had to be designed for that particular space. Also to take care of any overflow, which was a big factor from neighboring sites. So it was also, all the materials we used also was to relate to let it be floodable. So again, just to give you an idea, the drain covered anywhere from 21 to 50% of our site, depending on the stretch. So trying to navigate even planting on the drain, but maximizing all the space that we had for that capacity of the ground was a huge part of what we tried to accomplish. We also started, because a lot of this was not easy to accomplish, because the intent was always add concrete drains where possible. We spent a significant amount of time early on fighting to not build concrete drains, and so a lot of what we did was introduce concepts: sponge sites, zero discharge sites. We will take on all the water of everything in the neighborhood. This is so early on. This was one of our early smaller successes. This is 2019. That was 2019. This is 2020. 2019 we started construction. So this is one of the what we call bada hose, which was developed to collect water, and this today is completely overgrown. It's a large wildlife habitat. It's been closed off for the time being, but it's a huge catchment area. And this was taken on a day the entire city was flooded and shut down. This is the last stretch just the last stretch closer to the highway, and this is a stretch that we almost didn't manage to finish, the last 500 meters. Because if you see that building right there, there's a very important crossing in the highway, which, because of some drainage issues and how the road was designed, all the water, every time it rains, is pumped through that pump house into this area and just left on the drain. So all the area that you see that has water, that's the drain, and the rest is all raised. And basically all, and part of it was forest land as well. There were industries throwing toxic waste. It was just waste, and there was a lot of resistance to us being able to complete it, because they didn't want us to raise the drain. That's what we ended up doing. We raised all the malba on the drain so that we could create capacity. And we had the one advantage we had on this site is, because our clients had worked with the forest department earlier, there was an area of green that had been planted by others, and they had that they said, if you want to plant or if you want to develop, we will let you. So a large part of that we had the advantage of being able to take on and use that as part of our site. But when we came to the area right after this, there was this huge large area which we said we will take the entire area water of that city and we'll be able to manage. You will not have to put a single drop in this drain. Just for context, Badshapur drain also floods every year because it's a single city storm drain for the entire city at present. We spent I think 4 or 5 months fighting that through. We didn't get all the forest land, we managed to take on a little bit. And if you can see, this is last year, we managed to build it. Again, the city was flooded and people were commuting all the way across. In fact, we didn't realize how important this corridor was and how important that fight was at that point, because right across is Old Gurgaon, across the highway, and there's a footover bridge close by. And most people who work in the area use this now to save about another 10 kilometers of road access. They walk and cycle all the way through, cutting across through this area. We did just stop there 1 second. We did a count last year in July of just that last stretch, which is about 1.3 kilometers, to count in an hour how many people walked. And just in an hour there were 10,000 people in just one stretch. The other part, we haven't done any more counts, but we hope we'll do more soon. Because as I was mentioning, our client's mandate was restoration of native species. They have their own nurseries. They've been very successful across the city in doing that. So a large part of how they get that done is through corporates, but also plantation drives, educating people. This is some of what we have seen over the last just 3-4 years. We've also seen a lot of, we had on this, at least in the first maybe 4 stretches, we had maybe 3 trees. So I'll show you some photos ahead and you'll get a sense of what the space is. You can walk through it now and only hear birds and insects chirping. So I'm just going to run you through some of the images that we have, some of the before and afters. This is from where we start, Bird Point, this is Tehlo, Pani Point. So just to give you an idea of numbers, because that's where we're at now, we're trying to evaluate what we have been able to achieve and how we can use this to because a lot of what we've done, we want to see it done across the city, but not as a copy paste, because a lot of what we have done is been so specific to each single space, every kind of use, every kind of place, that's what we want to be able to translate in different places. Because a resultant of what I showed you the last image where the monsoon didn't flood, is now we had people come back and say, oh, we want to connect all the drains into this area so that it overflows, which is not what we want to see happen at all. So the quantum of waste we ended up using was 60,000 cubic meters, 70 seating islands, number of entries, 5.5 kilometers of walking cycling trails, 2 kilometers of jogging track, play areas, 55 different native species. So far 34,000 trees, at the last stretch alone, over 20 tons of plastic waste was removed, and we ended up saving also a lot of money. So we found that this was for us a very good way to showcase what we could do, and it also helped us so this project was actually a collaboration. It was not just us. We had our clients initially be very suspicious of some of the things that we were trying to do because their mandate was not so much. Today, a lot of what we did is their mandate. A lot of the people that we fought with in government to try to convince them, they are now our strongest allies. So it has been actually a process where from ground up we've been able to look at other projects as well and impact how they look at certain projects. We also had the opportunity to work in Gurgaon at around the same time on the areas. If you look along the streets, all the green belts in Gurgaon, they've typically given to corporates to develop, and each becomes an individual sort of, my little green patch. We always found that there is the border between Delhi and Gurgaon really has no, you don't know when you've arrived in a state, you've not arrived in a city that's a millennium city. So the area we found ourselves on, a corporate had got a space just for plantation, and we said let's make something more of it. Since we were doing work with waste and water and an idea of what we wanted the government to represent as a statement of who they are, we said let's use these areas that are along the road and with access. So there's a Ravali Biodiversity Park across, there are marble markets and illegal construction on one side, and it's really the highway that you see. So we had looked at it as it's an arrival, but it's also a departure. It's a statement of what it can be. We wanted to represent the idea of what, the contradictions of what Gurgaon is. So our concept started with the unfolding story of Gurgaon, its towers, its disparity, its history, its modernity. And then we worked with the sculptor Gopal Nam Joshi, who also works with waste. But it was also important not just to us, because our client here was, our ultimate client was Make My Trip, who had the space, who gave us the space to do this, that they had also been part of the journey of the Aravali Biodiversity Park to represent the Aravalis, and that became what we ended up working with. We worked with waste to create a sense of these panels of all the kind of metal waste we did. Here we decided design was where we're going to translate that space, again with our concrete debris walls. Most of this project happened during COVID. Here again, even though we were intending to do native plantation, here we didn't want it to be a forest. We wanted identification with very specific plants, so that familiarity with how you look at grasses, not just something that grows along the road, but as part of the design, how you look at color and texture and a space. And so today we now have Gurugram ki Udan, which is at the border, which has a native eagle, a sculpture designed by Gopal Nam Joshi, inspired by the native eagle owl, and then we created the panels and the space and the setting for that. Another project we did side by side, because we had been fighting about water so much. We were writing reports for every single thing that we felt needed to be done or needed to be saved. We worked on a Nala restoration at an area that again had been flooded. This for us was more of an experiment. It didn't work completely. We ended up stopping the flooding along the road, but because it was part of a larger network where there was so much sewage connections being made almost daily, that the larger interventions we were trying to achieve, and also with limitations of space and ability, we were not able to do. But at the same time, and that was part of it, in 2020 there were flash floods that flooded a very significant part of the golf course highway, which is almost parallel to the Aravalis, but it's also where all the new very expensive developments are, and they all got flooded. So as a result, the answer then seemed to be, okay, let's build a concrete dam around the Aravalis to hold the water back. And very encouragingly, the MCG put out a request for suggestions. So our clients, Terry did a study. We put together a presentation on what can be done, what should be done, and a lot of it was focused on nature-based solutions, clean up creeks, open out spaces, facilitate developments of all these spaces that come out. So just to give you a sense of where we are, the Aravalis are there. There are 4 or 5 main creeks that come across, that drain out, which go into Ghata and then further out towards Balchapur. The golf course extension road is the road right at the center, and along the side is the Wazirabad Chakarpur Dam, which was also designed by Veena I think in 2019. So a lot of the suggestions at that time, we did studies, we strategized, we put together proposals, and we were very encouraged because the CEO of GMD at that point said, okay, let's try this, because they've tried everything else. I think time was also limited. But this was the next year. The government as well took on a number of projects where they cleaned creeks, they cleaned their water bodies, and lots of other things. There were other projects that came out of this and are continuing to come out of it. The Sikandarpur Pond, which was under development, that Kavita Jain is now working on. This became a huge resource to drain water. Currently they're working on restoring the creeks. Another project that's been taken up that was part of the suggestions at that time was the Badshapur Bauli, which is a beautiful, one of the probably 5 historic water structures in Gurgaon, is now basically a waste dump. If you see the image on the top, you can't see it because they were planning at some point to build a road over it. But that's another project that's now taking shape as a result of some of this. Since we've been engaged in a lot of these projects, we've been getting more and more ambitious about how much of this engagement we can do and how far we can take it. So another project that we had started was a project which was called Anath Road. We started it on the same time. Anath Road is significant. It's just a 2.5 kilometer road stretch which connects the highway to Old Gurgaon Road. And as you can see, Maruti was a huge tenant. Again, this has a very diverse land use. There's the large Sirhol village. There are very large corporate houses. There's industry, the single family housing, again encroachments and other things. This road has been very challenged. It's a 10-meter carriageway, but it had almost 1,000 trees on that stretch, planted over many years, and 370 large mature canopy trees. And before we had come on this project, there was an intention, because it was waterlogged every year, to cut the trees, widen it and make it a 6-lane highway. So WRI fought it for a year and a half, and we came and fought again for another, basically tried to convince people for another 2 years. And then finally the project took on some shape. This for us has been more challenging because we were trying to apply a lot of what we said on a much more integrated project. This project also, because it was there were so many different agencies involved. In Badshapur, we were a little bit buffered by direct involvement other than from water, drainage, access. But here, every single agency in the city was there. There were services constantly being put in place. And this is something, but we've been very encouraged because of our experience with Badshapur. We've been able, with a different NGO, to have that dialogue with different agencies in the government, hold their hands also in what we feel are details they should do, are strategies that they should use for native plantation, for waste reuse, how you manage sites, how you manage accessibility, and just also this site has almost 20,000 people walking a day, and this was 5 years ago. 20,000 people and 33,000 cyclists. That was the impetus for us getting on this project. It's still a work in progress, but for us it's been very encouraging that even though it's been very contentious, it has brought every single stakeholder on board, including the users, because it's a functioning street, but also made us a part of what we feel we can play a role, which may not necessarily only be design, but a lot of it is letting people know what can be done and what our role can be in all of this. So all of these projects for us have been, to a large extent, proof of concept. Before we started, we could say whatever we like, but people said, you don't know the reality, how to make it better. We have now started efforts on capacity building, also on informing people what is it that they get out of this, because that's ultimately what you're looking for. There are a number of the tangible benefits we all know. You have open space, you develop corridors, you have walking, cycling, but so much of the other things that we struggle to articulate in terms of quantification are values that once you show a space and you experience a space and you see the transformation, they start to have a life of its own. So we've gone, in fact, even from very contentious relationships with people in the government to them understanding and owning this, which for us has been our greatest success. Also, because there are so many volunteers who participate in planting, there are so many staff, there are so many workers that have used the site and sponsors, the exposure has slowly built up. We started with challenges of working with waste where we could not find people to work with waste, especially with metal. In Badshapur we went through 30 welders who came, took money, ran away, and our clients told us, leave it, don't do this stuff. And we kept saying, no, we want to show it because that's part of what it is. And then we finally found people. So a lot of the challenges, even in terms of people being comfortable, we found so much beauty in the craftsmanship of people on site. Once they decided we are going to work with waste, they started creating patterns and using materials in ways that were even beyond what we would want them to do. So there was a lot of what we saw there. We're also looking at now using walks with children, walks with the neighborhood. Engaging the neighborhood for us has been a great sense of satisfaction, because they come out and now they own the space more than we do, and they demand to know who we are, which we find amazing, because for the longest time it was us telling us how they should or shouldn't behave there. And this week has been amazing for us because we had, and just to step back a little, this project started because the gentleman on the top right, that's Yashpal Yadav. He was the MCG commissioner when we started this project. He had seen some proposal to develop this into some kind of a sports field, and he had asked our clients to develop this. And he was very keen that there's an element of active play and resource for the city. Subsequently, he's moved on to many different roles, but it was so important for us to have that support at that time, because he not only initiated the project and supported it, but at the end, when we were struggling to finish the 500 meters, he came back and vouched for us to his seniors to make sure that the project got done, and that any hesitation that they had that what we were proposing would not work and it would be a calamity for the city, he supported. This week he brought 100 different commissioners of the municipal bodies across Haryana to come and see both these projects, Anath Road and Badshapur, and showcase what can be done and what should be done across the state. So that's my presentation. Thank you.